In November, you'll pay $80 for Grand Theft Auto 6. You won't own it. And on September 1st, Sony is going to show you exactly why. That's the day they delete 551 movies out of people's libraries. Not pirated movies, not rentals. Movies they had already paid for and thought they owned. Because according to Sony, they never did. They'd only bought a license. The same kind of license you'll get with GTA 6. You think they won't pull that one too, if it suits them? Now, this is PlayStation at the very top of its game. More profitable than ever. The biggest it has ever been. So why does it keep taking things away from the people who built it? One quiet decision at a time. Here's the uncomfortable answer. Sony probably never intended to betray anyone. It's simply become the clearest example of the biggest shift in modern business. The moment the things you buy stopped being things you own, ownership became access. And this isn't the story of a company that collapsed. It's the story of the cracks that show up first, the exact warning signs we've watched sink 3 brands already, forming inside a company that is still winning. And that is the most dangerous crater of all. The one nobody sees coming. Usually on this channel, we show up after the collapse. The Autopsy, Bud Light, Target, Saks. Today, we're doing something different. We're looking at a company that hasn't cratered yet. And to see the cracks before anyone else does, you first have to understand what PlayStation was. For 30 years, Sony built the most trusted name in gaming on one promise. Put players first. You bought a disc, and the disc was yours. Lend it, sell it, trade it, keep it on a shelf for 20 years. You owned it. And Sony didn't just believe that quietly. In 2013, when Microsoft tried to launch a console built around always online checks and restrictions on used games, Sony walked onto a stage in front of the entire industry and mocked them for it. They put out a video explaining how to share games on PlayStation. It was 22 seconds long. One person hands a disc to another person. That's the whole video. The internet erupted. Sony had deliberately planted its flag as the company that fought for your right to own what you paid for. That is the empire they built. Hold on to that image, one hand passing a game to another. Because everything that follows is Sony slowly taking it back. And an empire that big never falls from an attack. It changes from the inside, one reasonable sounding decision at a time. Then, in 2026, Sony quietly added the one thing they'd mocked Microsoft for. A check-in on your digital games. They called it anti-piracy. What it really means is simpler than that. The games you paid for now need Sony's permission to run. So let's follow the decisions. July 1st, 2026. Sony announces that starting in January 2028, it will stop making discs for new PlayStation games. All of them, its own and everyone else's. And the reason sounds perfectly reasonable. Almost 4 out of 5 games are already bought digitally. The world moved on, but the disc didn't fade because players stopped wanting it. It faded because a disc gives you the one thing a download never can. The ability to actually own the thing you paid for. Take the disc away, and the used market goes with it. The lending, the collecting, the shelf. And this isn't only Sony. When Grand Theft Auto 6 ships its physical edition this November, you open the box, and there is no disc. Just a code. That call is Rockstar's, not Sony's. And that's exactly the point. This isn't one greedy company. It's an entire industry quietly agreeing that the box you buy no longer has to contain anything you keep. The biggest game in the world isn't resisting this future, it's accelerating it. And here's the real reason. No middleman, no used copy, no disc to press. Sony owns every step now, and when one company controls all of it, prices don't fall. They climb. Because the one thing that ever made games cheaper, competition, is the exact thing they just deleted. Now go back to those 551 movies. Somewhere out there, someone came home, opened their PlayStation, and went to watch a film they'd paid for years ago. A real one, off that exact list. Terminator 2, Total Recall, The Deer Hunter, and then one morning, it was simply gone. No warning, no refund, nothing to click, no one to call. Just that small sinking feeling, you paid for this. And it turns out, it was never really yours. That feeling is exactly why this video exists, because it's happening quietly, to millions of people, and almost nobody is talking about it yet. Because the difference between renting and owning only becomes obvious the moment someone tries to take it away. And Sony's own terms say the quiet part out loud. The words purchase and buy do not mean any transfer of ownership. Everything is a license, and in their words, revocable. You didn't buy a movie, you rented one, on a clock only Sony can see. Ownership became access. Now, Sony has blinked before. Back in 2023, it threatened to pull purchase discovery shows. Fans revolted, and Sony backed down and cut a new deal. Proof that pressure still works. Remember that. It matters later. Quick aside, if watching giant companies quietly rewrite the deal is your thing, subscribe. We catch it while it's still a crack. Once you control the store, you control everything that happens inside it. And since late 2025, Sony has been quietly running pricing experiments on the PlayStation Store. The same game shown to different players at different prices, across more than 190 games in 70 regions, including the United States. And players started noticing something strange. Same game. Logged out, one price. Logged in, higher. The only thing that changed was who was looking. Sony calls these experiments, and maybe that's all they are. But notice where it points. In a world with no discs, there is only one store. Sony sets the price, the discounts, the refund rules, what you're even shown. And when one company controls every single purchase, who is left to keep it honest? For a while, the answer was the players themselves. In May 2024, Sony decided that PC players of Helldivers 2, a game they had already bought and paid for, would suddenly need a PlayStation account to keep playing it. In 3 days, the game took more than 200,000 negative reviews. Sony had to pull it from sale in 177 countries, where its own accounts weren't even available. And then Sony reversed. The requirement was gone. That is the hopeful thing buried in this whole story. When players push back together, even a company this size folds. The power is still there. The only question the rest of this episode asks is, what happens when they stop pushing? Here is where the crack finally becomes visible. Because companies don't stop listening overnight. First, they learn they can control access. Then they learn they can control the price. And eventually, they forget how to build the thing people wanted in the first place. A company that optimizes for control instead of connection slowly loses the one skill that built it. Meet Concord. Sony spent more than $200 million and years of work on a live service shooter, chasing a trend instead of making the kind of game PlayStation built its entire name on. It launched in August 2024, and at its absolute peak, it was played by 697 people, not 1,000, 697 players. 14 days later, Sony pulled it and refunded every copy. The fastest shutdown of a game that size in history. The studio that built it was gone within months. Concord wasn't a flop, it was a symptom. Because a company that spends its energy controlling customers instead of listening to them slowly forgets how to hear them at all. And that is the sound a crack makes. So where does it stand today? Here's the uncomfortable part. Sony is winning. Record profits. A massive install base. By every number Wall Street cares about, PlayStation is thriving, and that is precisely what makes this dangerous. Because a crater never announces itself while the money is still coming in. Bud Light looked untouchable until it stood for nothing and lost a third of its sales in a single summer. Target looked bulletproof until it flip-flopped and bled for 3 years. Saks looked eternal until one deal buried a 160-year-old name in 13 months. Every one of them was winning right up until it wasn't. Now, maybe Sony never becomes any of them. Maybe PlayStation dominates for another decade. Maybe not one of these cracks ever becomes a crater. That is genuinely possible. But history keeps teaching the same lesson over and over. Companies almost never lose their customers overnight. They lose them one reasonable decision at a time. One license instead of a purchase. One store instead of a shelf. One price for you and a different one for someone else. Each decision small, each one sensible. Until people look up and realize the company that once fought for them now quietly holds everything they thought was theirs. That's the whole lesson, and it's bigger than gaming. The most dangerous moment for any company isn't when it's losing. It's when it's winning so completely that nobody bothers to read the small print. Because 30 years ago, Sony stood on a stage and taught the entire industry that players should own what they buy. Remember that video, one hand passing a game to another? Now picture it in 2028. One day, someone asks to borrow your game, and there's nothing left to hand them. Ownership became access, and almost nobody noticed the moment it happened. And here's the part every business owner should sit with. Sony didn't wake up one morning and decide to betray its fans. Every single choice made sense on its own. Digital, licensing, one storefront, personalized prices, fewer physical things. Each crack looked reasonable in isolation. That's how it always works. Nobody ever sees the crater from inside the small decisions. The only way to catch it is to have someone stand outside them and look at the whole picture before it costs you anything. That's what I do. A free, no-pitch teardown of your brand, while it's still just a crack. Links in the description. One question before you go, and I read every answer. If buying isn't owning, is piracy then still stealing? Put it in the comments. And if you want to see how this story ends when a company ignores the cracks, you'll find another autopsy here on the right. If this was worth your time, hit like and subscribe. This is Crater. See you at the next collapse.